About 48 to 72 hours.
Okay, well, good afternoon. Welcome to Weather Center. I'm Bob Stokes. As George tears its way across the Caribbean, there is now a request for visitors and non-residents of the Florida Keys to leave the area.
At 30 miles an hour at times. At least 6 fatalities have been reported this morning, and the big question now is, where is the system headed next? Good morning and welcome to Weather Center. I'm Vivian Brown. More than 80% of Puerto Rico's 3.8 million people are without electricity this morning. Right now the storm is moving through the Mona Passage of Puerto Rico on its way to the Dominican Republic. In a moment we'll get the latest from Rick Griffin in the Forecast Center. But first, a look at what's happening in the lower 48 this morning. Expect scattered thunderstorms.
The west coast of Florida, if it moves along the Hurricane Center's official track, will get the onshore winds after the eye passes. So any storm surge would be after the eye passes on the west coast and before the eye passes on the east coast.
You just got to understand the structure of the hurricane, the twisting motion, and the circulation around it. Okay, Dr. Lyons, thanks very much. And thank you for joining us. We remind you we'll be here all day long on the top and bottom of the hours with the latest update on George, but you can find out what you need to know anytime you want on the internet. Weather.com gives you the latest information. And now let's go back to the studio to find out what's going on elsewhere across the country with the details. Here's Vivian.
Well, thanks, Bruce. Our latest satellite picture shows fair skies for most areas. Few clouds here, but rightfully so.
Pictures from Biscayne Bay, Florida, as the first of the rain bands from Hurricane George approaches. The evacuation of the Keys is complete, and now residents are just waiting and watching. Welcome to this special edition of Weather Center. I'm Rich Johnson. The center of George is back over water, and it's forecast to intensify. Janetta Jones is standing by in the Forecast Center with the latest on the storm. Janetta?
Thanks so much, Rich. We are watching very, very closely to see what's going to happen with Hurricane George. It is quite likely that we'll see intensification overnight tonight before it does move over the Florida Straits or somewhere close to South Florida. It has already claimed the lives of 110 people as it moved across the Caribbean. All right, let's take a look at the latest satellite vantage point. As it goes into motion, we do see that the center of circulation, which has been bordering on land on Cuba and the open waters, now seems to be over the open waters, and as long as the center is over the open waters, we could see some intensification. In fact, it's probably likely. As of 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, this is the latest information. No later tonight or early Friday, we have a hurricane watch and a tropical storm warning in effect from just north of Deerfield Beach at Boca Raton to Stewart on the Florida East Coast, and a watch in effect from just north of Bonita Beach northward to Longboat Key on the Florida West Coast and Key Biscayne. I want to introduce you to our hurricane expert, John Hope. John, you've been following hurricanes for many, many years. How does this one stack up?
Well, right now it's still classified, Janetta, as a Category 1 hurricane, but I'm afraid it's going to get stronger than that. It's going to do it pretty soon, too. One time this was a strong Category 4 hurricane, but then it's been a lot of places since then and done an awful lot of damage. Spent a lot of time over land, more than 24 hours. Recently, the center was over Cuba, and now it's emerging over the water, Florida Straits, north of Cuba, and very much intact still.
This special edition of Weather Center, I'm Paul Emick. This is quickly becoming a very dangerous situation, to say the least, for those who decided to ride out the storm in the Keys. For the latest information, we're going to switch to the Forecast Center with Jeff Morrow. Jeff?
And Paul, that is exactly right. For the folks that opted to stay behind in the Keys and not heed the mandatory evacuation, it's going to be a very, very rough night tonight. And we look like we're going to be having hurricane force winds there probably within the next 5-6 hours or so as the eye gets ever closer to the Keys. That's not to say the rest of South Florida isn't going to get battered somewhat as well, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, but particularly the Keys may bear the brunt of Hurricane George as it passes on by. Let's go ahead and show you George on the satellite perspective, and again, the eye very easily picked out here, right there off the north coast of Cuba, and moving generally in a west-northwesterly direction.
Weather Center after your local forecast.
Back from George's Punch. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the special edition of Weather Center AM. I'm Bruce Edwards as we continue to monitor a very dangerous Hurricane George that is moving across the Florida Straits, taking dead aim on the Florida Keys. Here's a satellite picture to show us exactly where the situation George is located. Again, a very well-defined hurricane that refuses to die as it continues to work across the Keys after it has come off the coast of Cuba. We're joined now by Dr. Steve Lyons, our hurricane specialist, and I mentioned earlier this is the hurricane that refuses to die. It's had a lot of time over land, but now it's over water, a favorable environment for further strengthening, and the Florida Keys just now really starting to get the effects of the system.
That's right. We've been monitoring a lot of the buoy observations along the Keys, and so far it's been strong tropical storm force with a few observations of gust to hurricane force, but that's going to change fairly quickly in the South and Central Keys as that hurricane moves closer. Just for you in Miami, that it's still dark there or just becoming light, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, it's Andrew all over again. Don't panic by any means. You're going to get a lot of rain. Most of the strong winds will be with that rain, but you'll probably see some gusts to hurricane force, maybe some hurricane force winds, but nothing like Andrew.
Well, folks in Marathon on the Florida Keys is still feeling the wrath of Hurricane George at this hour. Marathon continues to get pounded by heavy rain and some strong winds. We'll most likely see this continue through the next few hours. At its height, winds were gusting more than 100 miles an hour. Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Weather Center. I'm Janetta Jones, reporting live from the Forecast Center here at the Weather Channel. As we continue to monitor the situation, it is not looking good for later on this weekend for folks in the Gulf Coast. We are not finished with Hurricane George, even though it is moving away from the Florida Keys and away from South Florida. Latest. Now back to the studio.
All right, thanks, Janetta. By the way, this Weather Center is sponsored by Heal Heating and Air Conditioning Systems. Let's go ahead and take a look away from Hurricane George at the rest of the country. And on our current map, you'll notice that actually there's not a whole lot of activity once you move away from the Gulf Coast. And I think we have our current map to look at. And it might be on our other computer. There we go. All righty. We have
in Florida and has authorized federal assistance because of the damage from Hurricane George. Sarasota. Good evening. Welcome to this edition of Weather Center. I'm Janetta Jones reporting from the Forecast Center here at the Weather Channel as we are...
Gusts reached as high as 113. Where will Hurricane George next make landfall? Jeff Morrow is in the Forecast Center with the latest.
And Hurricane George is taking its time moving away from the Keys. Now the center or the eye of the hurricane is morning, sometime late tonight or early tomorrow morning, depending on the speed of this hurricane. Joining me now here in the Forecast Center is our tropical expert, John Hope. And John, this system continues on that west-northwest track, just kind of grazed the Keys today, but it was enough to do some damage.
Well, yeah.
Welcome to Weather Center. I'm Dan Atkinson. Millions of nervous eyes are looking to the Gulf of Mexico this evening. Hurricane warnings are up for a 4-state area. Jill Brown is standing by in the Forecast Center now with the latest on George. Jill?
All right, thanks, Dan. We saw what Hurricane George did to Key West. Now it looks like it may be a more serious situation as it makes its way toward the northern Gulf Coast. Take a look at the satellite picture and you'll see a strengthening Hurricane George continuing to move off to the northwest. Hurricane watches and warnings are up here, and if you are in a warning area, you should be taking this one very seriously.
They should. The weather has been very nice today in southeastern Louisiana, southern Mississippi, southern Alabama. The hurricane may not seem real at this point. Well, the hurricane is real, it's dangerous, and it poses a very serious threat.
All right, we have seen some strengthening today. We can show you the latest watches and warnings area through